I am going to give you 100% proof that God is real.
Oh, shit! I've heard that before.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Plank. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today, we are going to be looking at a video from a channel called Eternal Insecurity, a channel with well over 500 videos over the last 2 years, all about arguments for God and Christianity. And, not that low view count means anything, maybe his stuff just isn't hitting the algorithm right, all hail Algorithmo, but maybe that's changing, as his last few videos have popped up in my recommendations and have garnered a few thousand views apiece. And this one that we're going to be looking at today is attempting to prove that God is real. What he calls incontrovertible thought/apologetic trump card. And I'm interested to see what kind of trump card he's about to trot out. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see on this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe, click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon and Twitter, all linked in the description. And of course, like this particular video, maybe pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm. May its glory and unparalleled brilliance shine on forever and ever, and keeping my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
I am going to give you 100% proof that God is real. I'm going to give you scientific proof, rational proof, and even the opportunity to test this with me.
I hear this quite frequently, this scientific proof that God exists, and it absolutely never ends up being scientific. There's never any kind of experimentation set up, no control in place, no repeatable observation or outcome. It usually just boils down to an argument from incredulity, something like, well, how did such and such thing come about if not through the supernatural machinations of an all-powerful being? I can't come up with any other way that I can understand, so it must have been God magic. There, scientific proof. Or, alternatively, sometimes it's an observation of something occurring, like, say,
tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that. You can explain why the tide goes in.
Tide goes in, tide goes out.
And then leaping to the supernatural explanation rather than exploring the possibility of a natural explanation, such as the gravitational pull of the moon being responsible for the tides. It ends up being that they are starting from the conclusion that God exists and is doing things with his divine magic, and then working backwards from that conclusion to try to find things happening that they can fit into that notion. It causes people to fly right past any natural, yet possibly hard to wrap one's head around explanation, and instead leap right into the supernatural, unproven, unprovable, and undemonstrable God claim. But at least that's what I've found after looking into these sorts of claims for several years. But perhaps IE here is going to be the exception and give us something more substantive today.
So as I give you all this, some of you are going to reject it just out of personal bias.
Nothing like starting off with a good poisoning the well fallacy. This is when one commits a preemptive ad hominem attack against an opponent. That is, to prime the audience with adverse information about the opponent from the start in an attempt to make your claim more acceptable or discount the credibility of your opponent's claim. Claiming that anyone who might reject or disagree with your argument is doing so merely out of personal bias because they're non-believers and don't want to accept the validity and soundness of your position.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
Hold on, let me give you the proof. The harbor seal, you know, the mammal that swims around, it's got some flippers on it, it's got some tusks, it's got some whiskers, jumps in the water, typically lives along the coastline, etc. The seal can jump into water and sense where a fish was 35 seconds ago, or when it's 200 yards away. That is stupendous proof that God exists.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm a little taken aback by that. So you're saying that because the harbor seal has the ability to detect movement in the water from a swimming fish up to 35 seconds after it's moved through the water, that is proof that God exists. So I didn't even have to look up why seals can do that. I mean, I did just to make sure I wasn't wrong on it, but yeah, seals are able to track swimming fish using their sensitive whiskers by noting slight changes in the water behind swimming fish. In this new effort, the researchers have found that seals are able to use their whiskers to find prey hiding in the sand on the bottom of the ocean as well. This seems a rather basic example of evolutionary adaptation. You have a primarily aquatic species that thrives on finding fish and eating them. When a mutation occurs that results in an offspring having slightly more sensitive nerve endings that can, in just a very slight way, allow them to better track their fishy prey in the water, they're going to be more successful, thrive even more, and have the ability to pass that adaptation on to more offspring. Then later on down the line, other offspring have even more sensitive whiskers, maybe some coming along that have a few extra whiskers, making them even more capable trackers. They are even more successful and pass on that trait, etc. This is natural selection in action. This seems to me not awesome proof that God exists, but proof that evolution via natural selection exists. So, I'm curious how you intend to spin this into what you started off calling scientific proof for God, and something that we can test along with you. So, connect those dots for us, EI.
The seal's micro receptors can still sense which direction the fish swam and chased after it. But that's not the miracle part. The miracle part is that you couldn't do that. You could not jump into the water blindfolded like they had the seal doing, jump into the water and chase after the fish because you don't possess those receptors.
Right. Because I'm not a seal. I'm a cycloptic pink tribble. And most everyone watching this is a human. Humans were not subject to the selection pressures that seals were. Selection pressures is how natural selection works. A small adaptation is beneficial, and so it permeates throughout a species. It's why giraffes went from shorter necks to longer necks over a long period of time, because it was advantageous for them to be able to reach up higher as there were more leaves up higher to eat. Seals developed the keen sense of touch on their whiskers because it was advantageous for them to do so as a way of aiding their primary means of acquiring food. Humans don't live in the water. We have no need to develop subtle changes in water currents in order to track fish. But you know what is advantageous for humans? Having a well-developed sense of color-specific vision that humans have. I mean, there are plenty of animals that are either totally red-green colorblind, like cats and dogs, for instance, but we humans tend to be very good at distinguishing not only red from green, but can differentiate from varying shades of those colors quite accurately. Why? Well, one of the earliest hypotheses for why there's a benefit to having red-green color vision is that it allows primates to forage for red conspicuous fruits against a green foliage, says Adriana Briscoe, an evolutionary biologist at the University of California, Irvine. So why can't dogs and cats see green like we can? Well, because dogs and cats don't eat much in the way of vegetables. They evolved as primarily carnivorous animals. There was no evolutionary benefit for them seeing such variations in plants because they didn't forage for plants the way humans did. And we can play this game with practically anything that one species has over others. Why do bats have echolocation? Because they live in caves and areas with no or low light, so those with more well-developed hearing were more successful and passed on those genes. That sensitive hearing eventually adapted to being able to hear how sound reverberates off of solid objects in order to echolocate. And this skill similarly developed separately in whales and porpoises for the same reasons. This is evolution at work, and it is no surprise that animals who didn't evolve in a water environment didn't evolve to sense changes in water currents. Still not seeing how this is proof of a god.
I know some of you are like, what are you, like you're an idiot, comparing apples to oranges, humans to seals. But let's think about something for a second. I'm going to jump to your side of the fence, and we're going to come from a biological angle, from the evolutionary tree, and we're just going to jump to that side and just be all rational about this, right? So you're an animal, and the seal is an animal, and we've kind of developed. And you're like, well, we might not be in the same exact brand. Yeah, but the point being is that animals or humans all don't develop equally, and all don't have the same capacities or abilities. Now, do they?
Why would you expect them to? Heck, even creationists tend to believe in what they call microevolution, the idea that adaptation can occur that allows a species to diverge from others of its kind in some way. Like, for instance, greyhounds having the ability to run significantly faster than wiener dogs because they've microevolved longer legs and stronger musculature, even though they are of the same kind. So, not even believers in God would expect that all creatures, even within the same nonsensical and never properly defined kind, would have the same abilities. And since microevolution, and what theists would dub macroevolution, the changing of one species into another, is exactly the same thing, just over longer periods of time, there is no rational reason to think all animals would ever have the same exact set of capabilities. You say you're trying to look at this from my side of the fence now. Well, why would you think, from a naturalistic perspective, that different animals would naturally have the same set of abilities, and that the fact that animals have different abilities must therefore point to God? I'm not yet seeing the connection, buddy.
You see, not every human grasped the same intellectual concepts. So we know there is some sensation there or some ideas there, or some kind of power there that some humans have that others do not. We also know that humans don't have the same emotional quotients. They don't grasp the same feelings of others and the same vibes of others, etc. We also know that human beings don't have the same micro transmitters or whatever in their hands. I don't know what controls the micro functions of the hand, but your music and extreme artist performance, who are the world's greatest, they have more control of their hands than the average person.
Oh, I think I see where he's going with this now. It's a really long-winded way of getting around to it, especially since I actually cut out about a minute or so of rambling already. But he's basically trying to say that since seals can sense things that you cannot, then it stands to reason that there are some people who can sense things that you cannot. So people who believe in God just have a more advanced ability to sense God's presence than you do. And their testimony to feeling God's presence is therefore acceptable, conclusive proof that God exists. Do I have you right there, EI? Is that the level of hot nonsense that you're aiming for here?
Some of you know where I'm going with this. Are there God sensors?
Yeah, that's what he was saying. So, this is hot nonsense for a number of reasons. For one, when you're talking about a seal's ability to detect fish in the water, you're talking about a physical sense of something that is provably there. We know the fish is there. We can track the fish ourselves, and then watch a seal jump in the water and track the fish. And we can explain the natural phenomena that the seal is using to track it. The water physically moving as a result of the fish passing through it, the nerve endings on the seal's whiskers that are highly sensitive to movement. All of this is observable, identifiable, and physically existent. Same with a bat's echolocation. Same with a human's red-green color receptors in their eyes. But you're comparing all of these natural senses and abilities to something that is supernatural. You're saying that some humans have an extrasensory perception of the non-physical existence of a supernatural being that cannot be observed, cannot be identified, and is not physically existent. So basically, there's significant evidence to back up the physical abilities and senses of various animals. But there is no such evidence to back up the claims of those who say they've sensed or felt God. Now, you could say, well, that doesn't disprove their claims, that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Well, for starters, that isn't always true. Absence of evidence can be evidence of absence if one would expect to find evidence. If you tell me there's a car in your garage and I walk into your garage and can find no evidence of a car in there, that's good evidence that there is, in fact, no car in your garage. So, given the claims that theists make about the various gods that they believe in, there should be a wealth of tangible evidence pointing to the existence of such a being. And yet, none has ever been conclusively established to even exist. And no, seeing religious imagery appear in places that then become locations of worship to the faithful does not count.
Look!
What?
That is the Virgin Mary.
What? Oh, take it easy, bro.
No, look, the head and the arms and the cape.
Look like it.
I see it.
And furthermore, if you're trying to claim that because we can't disprove someone's claim to have sensed the supernatural, so we should therefore accept it, you would then need to give equal credence to those who say that magic is real, for instance. So spellcasting, hexes, voodoo dolls, and curses must be real because people have reported feeling the power of such practices. Or that past life memories are real. So hope you're okay with the idea of reincarnation and all that that entails, because people have reported experiencing memories or visions from the lives that they've lived before. I once saw a video of a guy filming people walking around a public library, claiming that all the people in there were demonic robots made by Satan to resemble humans, and he knew that they were robots and not real people because he could feel the demonic energy coming off of them. Do we assume his extrasensory perception is correct? Or do we label him as a mentally disturbed person in need of psychiatric help? At what point does sense become delusion? At what point do you say that hearing a voice is actually an auditory hallucination and not really someone hearing supernatural voices? At what point, when someone wakes up claiming to have had a vision of the future, do we relegate them to having had nothing more than a dream that means nothing? At what point is the overwhelming feeling of evil forces conspiring against someone not actually a sense of spiritual warfare, but a chemical imbalance in the brain producing a feeling that isn't real? Isn't real insofar as it's not a real sense of anything external, but is merely an internal mental malfunction. And it doesn't even have to come down to a psychiatric problem or mental illness. There is such a thing as mass delusion, mass hysteria. I mean, when they were burning accused witches at the stake in the 15 and 1600s, and people were testifying under oath in court, under oath to a god that they very much believed in, that they had experienced the evil power of the accused witches, that they'd seen them commune with the devil, they'd gotten sick right after touching them. Were they sensing real supernatural power, or were they just primed to believe such things, and their mind made it real for them, resulting in them sending a lot of innocent non-witches to the fire as a result? Cult members who claim to feel the divine power wafting off of their charismatic cult leaders, are they sensing some kind of supernatural or spiritual power that you and I cannot? And it, in fact, is that David Koresh and Bonnie Nettles and many others were actually divinely empowered by God? Or were those cult members primed to believe something so strongly that they claimed they felt what wasn't actually there to feel in the first place? Primed to believe a falsehood? The fact that there are loads of people who have claimed to have felt or sensed the presence of God is no more convincing of God's existence than the fact that there are loads of people who have claimed to have felt or sensed the presence of a monster in their closet is convincing of an alternate universe of child-scaring monsters.
Now see, right now when I told you about that testability portion of whether God exists or not, some of you have had the God sensors go off. Yeah. You've experienced that twinge that, oh, this guy is right. But let's turn that off. It's not that God doesn't exist or that your sensors aren't working. These nano sensors, these micro sensors that scream and give you some realization that God does exist, we have been ignoring those.
Or it's not that you have some kind of extrasensory perception, some kind of God sensors that have been detecting things outside the scope of the physical universe, but maybe it's that no such senses exist and no such being exists, and that you've been primed to believe that there is. And so you're experiencing false feelings based on little more than your desire for it to be real. Which seems more likely? Mass delusion based on lifelong indoctrination to a supernaturally centered ideology, confirmation bias, the sunk cost fallacy, and general wishful thinking, or undetectable, unverifiable, unobservable, unrepeatable, metaphysical existence that should leave some evidence if it interacts with the natural world and yet doesn't, should be scientifically confirmable and yet isn't, an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent God being. Which of those seems more likely? If your answer is the latter, then I don't even know how to begin to relate to your way of thinking.
So, I've offered you the scientific proof that not all human beings or mammals are the same, that some sense things that others do not.
That wasn't something that even needed to be proven, let alone something you needed to spend more than half of the runtime of your video establishing.
And so this should kind of take us down the path of wondering, like, if I'm not sensing God, but 80% of the world is sensing that there is some sort of God, maybe I should logically think about this more.
Well, that is just the appeal to popularity fallacy, using the popularity of a premise or proposition as evidence for its truthfulness. This is a fallacy which is very difficult to spot because our common sense tells us that if something is popular, it must be good, true, or valid. But this is not so. Especially in a society where clever marketing, social and political weight, and money can buy popularity. And organized religion certainly has a good marketing campaign. Get them while they're young and you can accomplish anything, not to mention running ads during the Super Bowl. Tons of social and political weight, and, well, as the saying goes, more money than God. The fact that the majority of people believe in a proposition is not a sound argument as to that proposition's truthfulness. And though you threw out the 80% number a bit willy-nilly, it does deserve a little more attention. Because for one, even though worldwide about 85% of the population identify with a religion, that does not mean that all of those people have claimed to have felt the presence of God. There are plenty of people who just accept the idea of God because it's what they were taught all through their lives. And they may belong to a religion, but are not particularly active within it, or have ever claimed to have felt or sensed the divine. Heck, there are even people who are faith leaders within a religion who do not necessarily believe in the very God they preach about. There's an entire nonprofit group for people like that. It's called the Clergy Project. Not to mention, tons of people who only attend church on Christmas and Easter, therefore identify as a member of that religion, but the other 363 days of the year don't care about the idea of God at all. Doubt any of them ever claim to have sensed God. Also, you've been talking about the monotheistic God, one all-powerful divine being. But just slightly over half of the planet is even monotheistic. Only about 55% or so. The other 45% not only includes the non-religious, but also those who profess belief or membership in a religion that may not have any gods at all. Or if they do, not the kind of all-powerful, universe-creating gods that you believe in. Once you take out all the non-monotheistic, the non-religious, the non-believing but still affiliated, and the believing but never having felt God's presence, and the likely self-deluding or mentally impaired, what percentage of that 85% is actually left? Are there any left at all? So that was EI's last point. All he had left after that was an insistence that Jesus was real and you should accept him as your Lord and Savior, and I'll spare you and myself from having to sit through that. But so, he began his video promising us three things: scientific proof, rational proof, and the opportunity to test this with him. And he didn't offer up any kind of scientific proof. Sorry, but explaining why seals can sense fish movement, therefore some humans must be able to sense the existence of the supernatural, is not scientific proof of any kind. It's a false analogy comparing a physical sense to a perceived extrasensory perception that has never been established to exist in the first place. The only attempt at a rational proof was the insistence that everyone has a supernatural God sense and some people are just ignoring it, a claim that has in no way been established, nor any evidence for that claim offered, along with the attempt at rationalizing an appeal to popularity fallacy. And then there was absolutely no opportunity to test any of this in the video. Unless he wants to think that his appeal to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior counts as some kind of a test of his hypothesis, which of course it doesn't. So there you have it. Seals can sense fish, and since you can't do that, it must follow that he can sense God and you can't, and therefore incontrovertible proof that God exists. This is the apologetics trump card. Or it's a textbook example of indoctrination, social pressures, and wishful thinking-induced self-deception. Especially when that self-deception is as simple as thinking you're experiencing a feeling when you really, really wanted to experience that feeling. Sorry, EI, but I remain thoroughly unconvinced. And so that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Don't forget to check out my Twitter and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Plinky merchandise. All that link below in the description. Also a big thank you to all my recent super thankers here on YouTube. Mabbity Babbity, Salvi Mike, Piao Octonawa, 404 Lyric, Mbran01, LHRPG Official, and James Lamica. Until next time, I'm Professor Plink reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.